I'm Jeff Siegel. I wrote the script for Hooking Up and I produced the film.
Hi, my name is Vincent Scordia. I was the director and producer.
Mark Rowland. I have a story credit and was also one of the producers.
Back in the summer of 2005, I was home for the summer. I went to school at NYU, and Mark was at Penn State. We both came home for the summer and had a typical kind of lazy sort of college summer. We ended up spending a lot of time at our friend Amanda's house because it was a big house. She had a finished basement and she had a pool table, and she always had lots of beer. So, you know, the formula's there for fun. We would end up going online.
We were looking through some various things online.
This is the summer that I first discovered Wikipedia, which was a real life-changing moment.
And we came across the term Siegeling.
Our first thought was this is hysterical, and secondly, does this really happen?
Which spawned several discussions about various sexual practices.
Around this time, a lot of media attention had sort of come to this new teenage culture of hooking up, friends with benefits.
So much, really has changed. The idea that relationships and dating are dead and people are just basically hooking up.
Things that supposedly teenagers did that we had heard about.
I don't know if this stuff actually happens. Does it happen? Didn't happen to me.
That spawned an idea to make a movie about the topics of things that go on with teenagers that you don't normally hear about.
We definitely heard a lot about this kind of stuff going on in high school. So Jeff starts, putting all this together.
Now the first concept for it was a series of vignettes, a series of shorts, without any real huge through lines about sexual things happening to teenagers in the suburbs.
Where everything is supposed to be everything's perfect because I have my green, I got my green lawn, we got the lawn mower, and we can have catch with dad in the backyard, but it's but behind the scenes, what are your children doing when you're not paying attention? They're on Facebook IMing, the guy they're about to blow.
And the working title of the script, in fact, I think past the first draft, was Sexual Perversity in the Suburbs. And I'd never written a script of this length. I'd written a bunch of shorts. I'd written some pilots too, but I'd never really sat down and write an original screenplay. Throughout that fall, we went our separate ways. We went back to school. Mark went back to Penn State. I went back to New York. Periodically, every couple weeks, I would open this document I had with ideas and just kind of play around with it a little bit. Getting into the winter, I kind of tried to refine the ideas, come up with some characters. I remember coming up with the characters' names and figuring out let's make Colin and April brother and sister, just kind of bringing everything together. So that winter we came back for winter break. I remember meeting at Vince's house.
Sitting around my kitchen table.
Going over the latest draft of ideas. That's still all it was at the time. It was starting to turn into an outline, but at the moment it was really just ideas. So I really sat down and started working on the script in January of 2006.
So Jeff worked on the script?
The first draft took about 3 weeks. I wrote it in New York over the hiatus. I was visiting my grandparents in Florida. I did some writing on it down there. I remember just writing wherever we could. I was really getting into it and it was a lot of fun.
A couple weeks later, Jeff had a first draft of the script.
He sent me the script, the first draft, a little under 90 pages.
They gave me some notes and we went through it.
We went through a couple drafts of the script.
May of 2006, we really decided we're gonna make this thing a go. Mark and I both had just graduated. Mark came up to New York.
We went through the script, came up with, I don't know, 1 or 2 more drafts, added a couple of things.
We got it to a level that we were comfortable with and we kind of started casting.
So we started casting, again, with the intention of just getting no-name people, up-and-coming talent. That's what you call people who don't have names, up-and-coming talent, regardless of if they're talented or not.
And I was just completely blown away by the people that would show up at our apartment.
We set up a thing for about a month or so.
Reading lines with actors, having people come to you and try to impress you, that's always a lot of fun.
And we cast in New York where we had an apartment. I mean, we had a lot of options actors-wise.
We were very reluctant to include nudity as being mandatory, and we had told a lot of our actresses that it wasn't going to be necessary. It's not that we didn't want nudity in the film. We were concerned that if we said nudity was required, we weren't going to be able to get that same level of talent that we would. There was this guy, he really wanted his daughter to have a part in our movie, and he went as far as to offer us, I think it was $15,000. We actually seriously considered it at the time because we really didn't have any money. I remember taking Jeff and Mark aside and being like, we need a name. We need someone who's going to make this project stand out.
You can get a free 2-week trial on IMDb Pro. And IMDb Pro gives you access to actors and actresses, management, and talent agents and such.
And then we sent a bunch of emails to a bunch of different actors.
Who are people who are known but are not very well known anymore?
Jeff contacted Corey Feldman's agent.
He was interested, and we set up a conference call
At my office with him and his agent.
We came to an agreement with Corey. I negotiated the deal, which in hindsight I probably shouldn't have because I didn't know what I was doing. But you live and learn, and you take what you can get at the time. In addition to Corey Feldman, we cast a great ensemble, up-and-coming cast. The girls, Allison Munoz, Lee Viens Gordon, Allison Whitney, Jessica Howell. In the entire casting process, we must have seen, I don't know, 100 guys or something. We only had one potential actor who could play John, and that was Parker.
Parker is like a bottle of Jolt, and he just brings it. I don't know of anyone else who could have played that part as well as he did.
Although he's a bit on the goofy side, he's a bit ridiculous, he's off the walls, he can't read. He understands that John character. When it came to Colin's character, that was another important one. We needed someone who really could pull off creepy, bi-curious, Jim DeProfittis, home run. These sort of everyman, more normal guy to level out the male ensemble was Ted Sangelis. The part we didn't get to cast for was the Mr. Kimball part because we knew we wanted someone who'd also had some credits like Corey Feldman who had some name recognition, but nothing sort of came through to fruition before we started shooting. So we said, you know what, let's postpone that whole storyline in the script, the Mr. Kimball part, and we're gonna just shoot that at another time whenever we can get someone.
There was no time whatsoever for rehearsal. Actors would come in without having ever even met one another. Here's the script. Come to the set, how you doing, let's shoot. There's nothing wrong with that because we were forced to do it, but in retrospect, I really wish that we had had the benefit of rehearsal.
Production began on the film July 31st, 2006. We started by the pool. I remember that day clearly. It was the first day I met Paul Bradburn. He had a very long beard type thing. He's a good friend. We couldn't have made the movie without him. And it was that sort of a thing that helped us get through it. Vince's good friend from high school, Mike Chakowski, called Paul up.
Turnwall, the director of photography, Stephen Robert Turnwall.
I was very blessed to work with just a great group of friends who, that I went to college and high school with, showing up every day, working their asses off for nothing except the love of making movies, which is why we're all here to begin with.
It was friends helping friends out that got things going. So we shot the first part of the movie. Corey came out. It was a stressful time period. I think I blocked out most of the memories because it was kind of awful. There was a lot of animosity and fighting, but this is all normal apparently on movie sets, a high stress environment.
Trying to manage tempers and egos. Making everybody happy is a difficult job. It was very grueling. I don't know how else to put it, 12, 14, 15-hour days. There was a lot of driving and a lot of moving people around.
We wrapped shooting in September 2006. At the moment, we didn't know who's gonna edit it. We don't even have a computer to edit it on. What's gonna happen now? It's like one step at a time. And that, unfortunately, is the reality of making a movie on the real cheap. We finally met a really nice guy who helped us out named Frederick Lumiere. He actually lent us an Apple G5 computer to do the editing on, and we finally were able to start reviewing the footage and editing that January.
I remember like a 2-month period. We would just cut this film forever, it seemed like.
So it actually didn't take that long, about a month or two, to get a rough cut put together. But keep in mind, we still had a large chunk of the movie missing, all the stuff with Mr. Kimball. Through this whole process, we met a woman who has been a real help throughout the whole process named Eileen DeNobly. We went to her and said, we need to shoot the rest of the movie now. So she kind of walked us through the process of actually casting the way Hollywood casts. We ended up getting Bronson Pinchot to play Mr. Kimball. When we initially shot the movie, Dr. Jordan, who's also Michelle's father in the movie, the principal of the high school, we had actually had a different guy play that role.
I know we don't have anything to worry about with you, hon.
What happened was when I sent this guy an email and said, hey, I know it was like 4 or 5 months ago we shot the movie initially, but we need you to come back to shoot. The guy emailed me back and said, I'm sorry, I'm out of acting, I've moved to Oklahoma. I told this to Eileen and she said, well, hey, this could be an opportunity to recast with another name. We expanded the role of the principal. What didn't used to be as big, we wrote a few new scenes, we enhanced some dialogue. We were able to then cast Brian O'Halloran in that role.
Oh, I know we won't have anything to worry about with you, hon.
Brian, obviously the star of one of the most successful independent films ever made, Clerks, which launched Kevin Smith. And actually Clerks 2 came out while we were shooting the initial part of the movie, and I think Vince and Turnbull actually went to see it on one of the days off, which is kind of funny because we're shooting the movie, they're watching a movie starring a guy who no one even knew at the time would eventually be in the same movie that we're shooting. And I think we shot for about a week with Brian and Bronson, and they ended up having a lot of scenes together. We finally wrapped shooting on the film at the end of May 2007. This time at least we had the computer up and running and we had a cut of the first part of the stuff, so we added in relatively quickly the new scenes, and suddenly we had what looked like a rough cut of a movie. And we essentially finished editing it, getting everything going as far as just finalizing and locking the edit. So 2008 rolled around, we had a cut, but the sound was a mess, the picture was a mess. These things happen on all movies, but especially movies with no budget. Set out to get the color correction done, the audio cleanup done. We settled on a place, Maja in Philadelphia, who did our post-production audio. Really good group of guys down there. They also ended up doing our color correction.
That really ended up taking a lot longer than anyone could have thought. A lot of things that you don't necessarily learn about in film school, and you learn about on the spot.
You hear the stories about Clerks. They made the movie, it had a lot of problems, but they showed it to someone and they loved it and they bought it, and then this company fixed all the problems and took care of all the logistics of delivery. Unfortunately, thus has not been the case for us. We were kind of responsible for doing every painstaking and expensive step of getting it exported and getting the score added.
To see it actually come together, to actually get a soundtrack, to actually get properly edited, color corrected, to see all of that come together, it's actually a great achievement.
Then we finally, in the spring of 2008, got a little interest from a film rep who we ended up signing with, and we were really psyched about the process. Finally, oh my God, it's almost over. His company likes it and they're gonna try to sell it at markets all over the world. This is great. Fall 2008, we're done. We got the cleanup, the color correction, we got the score, and then clearances hits us. Clearances, if you don't know, are anytime you feature products and logos and anything copyrighted in your movie, it needs to be cleared by the copyright owner. And unfortunately, we were very naive when shooting this movie. We didn't have real set designers or set decorators, and we just kind of threw up whatever kind of stuff you would see in teenage guys and girls' rooms. The worst room in the movie, Tyler's room, which we shot at my friend Jason's house, he had a Britney Spears poster, which we thought, hey, this is great. This is supposed to be this movie about teen sexuality. What drips sex more than Britney Spears? Unfortunately, we finished cutting it and we showed it to a clearance expert and they say, no, you can't show Britney Spears. So it became another huge hassle to, after it was already done and cut, you obviously were not gonna reshoot it. I ended up just sitting there frame by frame and blurring out, darkening stuff, and finally, until we got the approval of the clearance experts. The film is, it's an ensemble piece.
The movie is such a hodgepodge of storylines and characters. What can you say?
I like to say that it's similar to Crash. You know, it's about a bunch of different people, all connected. But some other people would say they think it's more similar to a car crash than the movie Crash.
Ultimately, this is a movie about real people. I understand at times it's a little bit ridiculous, it might seem a little over the top, but the bottom line is this is a movie about young people. All these people in this movie are people that you'll find at any high school in America. There's definitely things in this movie that happen all the time with people that you know. One of the key elements or themes in the film is how oral sex has replaced sex, and you have young girls who are having oral sex or anal sex in place of intercourse because they feel like it somehow keeps them pure or preserves their virginity.
Head isn't sex.
Within our culture right now, this is definitely something that's happening in high schools, middle schools, and I'm glad that we were able to kind of, showcase this phenomenon.
The locations on the film were generously donated.
I just remember kind of a scramble to find locations.
We shot all on location. Nothing was done on any kind of a soundstage or anything like that. So we were working in very cramped, tight spaces.
I knew we had to shoot in high school. So I just kind of said, well, I don't know, I guess we'll shoot at the high school we went to. Thankfully, I was a relatively good student in high school, and for whatever reason, one of the assistant principals, she remembered me and she said, sure, come shoot at our high school. Unfortunately, on a few occasions, we made our mark, let's just say. One of the houses, we broke the toilet and unplugged the refrigerator in their basement, but we forgot to plug it back in, and we ruined all their frozen food. I go over there every holiday season, and their house is also the one whose bathroom we use for Bronson when Michelle hits on him. Bronson had a lot of makeup on, and you know, he's very physical, and he hit his head against the wall. He leaves marks on the wall, and they're still there. I go in that powder room, and there's just skin-colored makeup marks on the wall from Bronson Pinchot smashing his head. We wanted to essentially just make a movie, to learn how to make a movie in the process. You can't quite get prepared for a feature without making one.
And a lot of people were like, you know, maybe, you know, you can be like a PA for a couple of years, or, you know, maybe you should try doing this instead, or, you know, don't get too ahead of yourself. You know, you got your whole life in front of you. But my whole feeling was always like, you know, I would watch like Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez and even like Kevin Smith. You just got to do it, you know. I mean, it may not come out perfect, you know, it may not be the greatest thing ever, but you really got to just go full force and put everything you can into something.
And you're working with such a small crew, and everybody in the crew is just out of college. Everybody in the crew is almost as inexperienced as you are.
Obviously, it's good to have a good foundation and background before you start, but I think there's also a lot to be said for learning through practice.
You learn a lot on the fly.
Whenever you're telling anyone I'm making an independent film, they bring up, oh, like the Blair Witch Project? Yeah, exactly, like the one most successful one ever made.
As a first effort, I mean, the film, it's not perfect. I would never claim that it's perfect. But what I do know is that as a director, I made it my goal for us to all go out there and work hard and give our all, and you know at the end of the day that we did everything we could to make this the best movie we could.
Our first idea for the film was to make it as cheap as possible, literally no budget, relying on our own passion for the project and donated time of some friends who had their own equipment.
When we started planning this production, we weren't thinking in terms of post-production. We were thinking in terms of how much money do we need to get it in the can.
Trying to scrape together as much money as possible. Family, friends, friends of family.
You kind of do it one step at a time. You run out of money, and you got to then get more money before you can resume.
We would have just enough money to shoot, and then we would have to stop filming.
Normally on a movie, you have pre-production, production, which is when you're shooting the movie, and then post-production. But on our movie, it went like this: pre-production, production, post-production, pre-production, production again, more post-production for 2 years. So that's the first sign that you're doing kind of an amateur movie.
I mean, we were strapped for cash. The director of photography stayed at my house for the majority of the shoot. Vince had people staying at his house. A lot of the budget went towards food, just trying to get people fed. And you're talking about a budget that is constantly fluctuating, constantly changing, ever fluid. To work with professional actors like Bronson and like Brian, that's a joy. It was quite an experience for everybody on board.
In addition to working with a great group of up-and-coming actors, I was truly privileged to work with established actors like Corey Feldman, Bronson Pinchot, Brian O'Halloran. You know, I grew up watching these guys.
I'd like to just say that on the record, Brian O'Halloran was incredibly helpful as far as giving us his time and not being so strict about the rules, maybe breaking some rules along the way to help us out, shoot some extra stuff, giving us some time at a convention for horror movies and trying to mention our movie, our little comedy, to try and get the word out there. You know, that's above and beyond.
Brian was just the most easygoing guy like I've ever worked with. He was funny and he was great with improv. He was always coming up with like these funny lines to add in. I remember Corey coming, to the set for the first day, and I introduced myself, and we talked a lot about the character, and then he proceeded to spill an entire bottle of Coca-Cola over Jeff's computer and fried it.
If it was 1986, this movie would be the #1 movie in America.
The original title of the movie was Cluster.
I remember, I think it was after I finished the first or second draft, I remember calling Mark and saying, hey, I got a great idea. Let's call it Cluster. Why? Because first of all, The story is kind of a big mix-em-up of, the sexual affairs of a bunch of different teenagers.
It's one of my favorite words and one of Jeff's favorite words.
It's really picked up in popularity in the last few years, really found its way into the American vernacular.
Obviously, it's not the most marketable title.
When it came time to try to raise some money from family and friends, we said, let's not call it Cluster F***. Let's call it just Cluster. That's a lot more palatable.
Cluster didn't really make as much sense. Then we had a bunch of titles pushed on us.
So they ultimately changed our name to Hooking Up.
Which is fine, that's the industry, that's where movie titles change. The movie really is a cluster of storylines, but it's also about hooking up.
At least that's a term that's used and it's relevant to the subject.
It's also about, loose girls, loose women, and fast cars and rock and roll.
I remember our initial poster that we made and had forever was literally just white background with lipstick sitting there. And that's sort of the kind of thing I think that we liked a little more. We were more of the implicit. I mean, to me, if I saw that, that's implying a lot. That can be taken very sexually. Even when it comes to marketing small budget movies like this, they're not really a fan of the implicit. They're much more a fan of the explicit. They made a poster, it was literally just a girl's ass. It says, hooking up. I mean, that doesn't really make you think too much, does it? I'm just a fan of a little more subtlety.
If I had a favorite scene in the movie, it would have to be one of the Colin scenes. One of the weird scenes with him either in front of his computer or masturbating in bed. We're standing in front of the mirror.
Yeah, suck me off.
The stuff with Bronson Pinchot was also very good. All of his stuff came off very natural, very funny, very awkward. Bronson, who's in his 50s with a 15-year-old, 16-year-old girl, that's very funny to see them interacting in a tight space and to see his momentary doubts where he almost grabs her, almost kisses her, almost takes that leap but doesn't.
It's the scene where Corey Feldman goes and attacks Allison Whitney, and they have this huge confrontation.
You're fucking cheating on me. It's right here.
And then he ends up throwing her down the stairs.
Get the fuck out of my house.
It's dramatic, but there's also a level of black comedy underneath. Like, some people are horrified by it, and then other people think it's funny, and I think it's really a combination. The character of Ryan was always a personal favorite of mine. I was always very protective of that character, and I was always very specific over how I wanted him to be portrayed. I love the idea of Corey Feldman playing like this complete, like, f***ing asshole who's like, beating the out of his girlfriend, and he's like a he's using drugs, and like the audience hates him. And
Probably the track scene, very opening scene of the movie. That scene was planned to be a lot later on in the movie, and we had this whole elaborate idea of opening the film with this sweeping shot through suburbia, kind of entering this suburban world, and I would have loved if that had worked. We shot it on the back of Vince's uncle's pickup truck while Turnwall was sitting there, a low-end Steadicam dangling off his chest, off the back of the car, and then we had to play the clip in reverse, and it just looked awful. We scrapped that idea, and we decided to start the movie with more of a punch. Before the credits even roll, let's get right into a scene that introduces these characters.
It would be really hot if I could find a girl with a physical deformity where she had 2 vaginas.
That scene started years ago when I went up to Penn State, and I was having a conversation that somehow came up. We had this dialogue similar to theirs about the logistics of a girl with 2 vaginas.
Do you mind?
Which is really good since it opens it, that the movie's kind of bookended, because the very last shot of the film after the credits roll is John with Jess. We imply that perhaps she has double vaginal disorder.
Overall, the movie was a good process. It took years. We're at 3 years now. There's so much that goes on behind the scenes. It's the ultimate collaborative art form. There are so many people that have to be doing their jobs correctly in order to get a movie made.
The whole process was very collaborative from the beginning.
For a movie like this, you really are forced to immerse yourself in that collaboration mode, and I think it really benefits the movie because you have a lot of different things to choose from. It's not just all coming from me.
On a film like this, the functions are not what they would be on a real movie. Producer is a gigantic blanket term, can mean anything from driving someone to the train station, to picking up chicken, or to sometimes directing the actors. Who knows? It's a little bit of everything. We kind of had to throw the rules out the window a little bit.
I think for the budget, what we were able to do, first-time filmmakers, just out of college, with no real money of our own, I think we were able to create something that was marketable, that has its moments, that can be really funny at times. I think it came together well, all things considered.
If anything, I could say that, you know, the three of us have learned so much from this process. This movie was grad school